Good morning, everybody, to yet another Roy Branson Sabbath School, Legacy Sabbath School. We are here on the West Coast. Most of us, we have a very good presentation going forward, and I'm going to give it over now to Donna so that she can bring us into the presentation. Thank you, Donna.
Our scripture reading this morning is from Psalm 95. I'm reading from the New English Bible. Come, let us raise a joyful song to the Lord, a shout of triumph to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving and sing him psalms of triumphs. For the Lord is a great God, a great King. The prayer for this morning is from suggested by Bob, but from Pope Francis, and you probably see it now on your screen. It's a prayer for the earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Sorry. And in the smallest of your creatures, you embrace with your, I am repeating myself. The presentation this morning is by Dr. Robert Ford, and those of you who were here last week know how good it's going to be this week. I'm going to say a few words about Bob Ford. I culled what I have to say from his 27-page CV, so you can imagine that there's much more that will remain unsaid. In preparation, as I said, I looked through his CV and give you the following very few facts out of his incredibly rich and varied career and life. After obtaining a BA in History and Religion at PUC, and I think that's an interesting background. Obviously, his interest in religion has been retained and is present and made itself manifest in everything he took up the rest of his life. He had 2 master's degrees here at Loma, one in public health, another in social anthropology, and a PhD in geography and earth science at UCR. He has worked the globe for numerous entities, some inside and others outside the SDA Church. When I say work the globe, I mean it literally. He's been a Fulbright scholar in Honduras and has worked most of the coastal regions and countries of the South American continent. He's worked in almost every country in Africa. I counted 11 out of his CV, but especially in Rwanda, where he spent time there at the Adventist University. He's also worked in China, Pakistan, the Marshall Islands, and I noted even a little time perhaps in Abu Dhabi. He's consulted and taught for all of these entities. He's worked for ADRA, for USAID. He's taught at PUC, the Adventist University of Central Africa, where he was for several years, and at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. So this is a man who connects a number of institutions. He is, as we all already know, a committed environmentalist in the best sense of that word. With ongoing interests in geography, ecology, biodiversity, land use, biotourism, maybe he'll explain that, and in the sustainability of humans and the food supply in the earth. Those of you who read Dave's summary that was sent out this week of what Bob will be talking about will know that he follows in some big footsteps. He's going to give us an update, as you can see on the cover screen here, of the Ford family legacy. He is a grandson great-grandson and son of Adventist missionaries to Latin America. I'm going to guess that the E in your middle name is for Eldon, your grandfather, but
That's
do you
correct.
have it? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I thought perhaps that would be right. He has been a missionary, as I said, to Africa and to other places. Today, he's going to report on his most recent trip to Inter-America, where he revisited some of the places where his parents were. And can't wait to hear you. So, Bob.
Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate that. And some of you may remember years ago the book "These Fords Still Run." I think they've reprinted it several times, but it talks primarily about my grandparents and a little bit about my parents. But I'm going to reprise some of that briefly. But I wanted to broaden it to beyond just the Fords, because on both my maternal side and the paternal side, we've got quite famous missionaries. On the left here, there's my grandfather, Orly, my dad, Eldon, in the middle, and me, Robert. This is in El Salvador quite a few years ago. As you can tell, I actually had hair back then. The middle, the Stores, that's my wife's family. Bill Stores, he was a missionary for India many years, spent his whole career there. The younger brother, Lester, was a missionary to Vietnam for 10 to 15 years, something like that. And then my wife's dad, Arno, he never served as a missionary, was a pastor and Bible teacher here in the US, but he joined us in Rwanda for a year and a half when they were retired. So he had his mission experience as well. On the Standish maternal, there's my mother, my grandfather, Horace Standish, and his wife, Edith Fry Standish. Edith Fry is a descendant of Governor Bradford back to the Mayflower. So the family in New England, and then my aunt Juanita. So that, you know, that now the Fords, you know, and the Frys have a long history in Latin America. You mentioned briefly. I'm going to go through very quickly. On the top left, this is an old picture of my my great. I guess, let me see this. This would be my great grandfather on the maternal side, H.D.H. Fry. He almost died in the Civil War. He was wounded at the Battle of down along the Mississippi River. Thought was dead. Either fell overboard or were pushed overboard. Came to, made it to shore. Nursed, went back to New England. Had this large family, and then you can see the two twin sisters. That's my grandmother, Edith Fry, is one of those two there. She went to Puerto Rico in 1912 to be a nurse. And the World War I, of course, broke out. She had to come back early because of fear of U-boat damage and stuff. Came back to Lancaster, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, at the Adventist Hospital, a sanitarium then, was serving as a nurse. And she was treating one of her patients, was a childhood friend who died from the Spanish flu. Okay, now we're in COVID times, so we're kind of remembering what that kind of time was like. So she was treating this friend of hers in the hospital who died. Before she died, she said, "Would you marry my husband?" Okay. And I'm cutting it didn't happen quite that fast, but that's basically the long and short of it. And so my grandmother married Horace Standish. And then from that union, the previous married didn't have any children, and those two children became my mother and aunt. In the middle bottom here, we see Orley Ford when he was about 16, 17, already pretty tall guy. And he went with his father, Grandpa Willis Ford. They went to Cuba to be self-supporting missionaries and colporteurs. Unfortunately, Grandpa Willis had a very hard time learning Spanish, okay? And so he gave up and came back home. But Grandpa enjoyed it. I mean, my grandpa, who was a teenager, loved it so much, he says, I want to go back. So he went to Walla Walla College, and Walla Walla College, and then became a missionary. And I'm just going to touch on some of these background issues just to kind of set the stage for my most recent trip down there. But these are some family photos from those days from the Fords. On the right is the wedding day, 1912. Grandmother Lillian Ford and Orley Ford on their wedding day in Walla Walla, and they left 2 months later to go to South America. And I'll talk about, on the bottom left is Grandpa Orley Ford at the General Conference of 1962, as I recall, or 64, in San Francisco. Some of you may have been there. And he was kind of an honored guest at that time in that famous event. Now, I'm not going to read this, but I just mentioned if you want to look at this later. This is an interesting, yes, Donna, you have a question?
Could you go back to that previous slide? I know you're trying to get through the background, but I'd like to know who is
Sure.
just briefly.
Okay.
In the middle slide, the upper middle, is that Orley and Lillian with their children?
Yes, that's Orley and Lillian with my father, who's the one with the little round glasses, and his sister, and these are the two that survived. Okay, they had 5 children, 3 of them died, and so that's part of the story. That's that one that you don't hear much about. And then in later years, the bottom one is. Again, Orley and Lillian, and on the left is Sylvia. She's the daughter that survived. And on the right, that's a little boy, Donnie, that he died. And I'll tell briefly about him a little later. So let me continue on here. This is going kind of slow. Let me do it this way here. My screen, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we hear you, but it looks like the changing. Yeah, okay, now it's working. Thank you.
Yeah, just brief. This slide, you can go back, and this was a letter that the grandparents wrote back to the Missions Club in Walla Walla in 1920. This was after they had been in the mission field for a few years to encourage a lot of their former classmates there. I should mention briefly, from those of you at Loma Linda, that Orley and Lillian first went to South America to replace Fernando and Anna Stahl. Many of you know about him. And of course, the Stahl Center is at La Sierra University. They went home on furlough, and my grandparents went to their mission up on the Lake Titicaca. And when Fernando and Anna Stahl went back to South America, they went to the Amazon, and my grandparents stayed up in the Andes. A few other pictures, and I'm just going to touch on a few of these just because there's some interesting stories. In the top right, you see the 2 sisters here. This was my grandmother Lillian with her a little bit older sister. They were, well, a little bit older. They were 13th and 14th of 15 children. Okay, so it's a pretty big family back in Kansas. Lillian was kind of a gadabout, loved partying, And her mother, who was an Adventist, but her father was not, her mother wanted to make sure that she didn't just end up being just kind of not much of a, get much of a life. So sent her to live with her sister that lived in Washington State. And she had become a school teacher. She went there, finished high school, and then went on to Walla Walla. Grandma told me years later, she said, all I wanted to do was to dance and party. That was her life when she was a young kid. I think, that sounds a lot like other kids we know about even today. But they grew up. In the top left picture, that's a sad picture. That's Grandpa Orley just before he died. He died at 76. Grandma lived to be 96, so she lived another 20 years, and that's quite a story. In the bottom left, that's an event when Grandma was being commemorated for her starting Pathfinders. She's the first one to start Pathfinders in Central America, and we'll talk more about that later. They're both buried in El Salvador. This is one of my last visits, not the recent, but before I got to visit their grave where they live. Now, what are some of the sacrifices that missionaries make? And of course, the toughest ones are the ones that happen to your family. They were young. The middle picture shows them when they first went to Titicaca. Their first baby was born there. And you can see the baby there on the right. They're dressed in indigenous clothes, and their baby, Teddy, in the middle one, he got sick. His lungs were not very strong. They were up at 14,000 feet in the Andes. The baby, I don't know if they ever knew for sure what happened, but the child didn't live very long, died from pulmonary edema and he was quite weak. So it's kind of a sad. And then the second child was my father. He did okay. And then they had a third child. On the left, you can see Arliss. And that child, they came home on their first furlough. Here's, their first child had already died in the mission field. The second one is my father. And then the little kid there, Arliss. And they're at visiting Mary Andros. Some of you may know the Andros name from Adventist history, some of the first Adventists in the Northwest and so on. And they were visiting there, and Arliss died while they were on furlough. It was a very traumatic event for them. On the right is a favorite picture of mine. My dad riding on the back of my grandmother, my mother, in the traditional Indian fashion. Now, I'm not going to read this, but this was an article when their third child died. Donnie, you see the picture here, he's in the middle, at 9 years of age. He was a beautiful kid. I heard much about him when I was a kid. And he died from a severe infection when they were in Costa Rica in 1943. Grandmother, who was a very good writer, wrote this article in the Advent Review, and it's about what it means bereaved as a missionary mother. It's a very touching paper, and I read it every now and then just to kind of remember. So I encourage you to go back and look at this. Now, these early missionaries, and not just the early ones, but even missionaries today can go through some very hard times. And I'm not going to, you can ask questions later about some of these. The top middle, this is pictures of the 1986 earthquake in El Salvador. My parents and grandparents were there at the time. And a lot of difficult things happened. Volcanic eruptions. The bottom middle is a picture of Hurricane Hattie. This is while my parents, not grandparents, were in Belize, one of the most deadly typhoons or hurricanes to hit the Caribbean. Over 1,500 people were killed, 300 people in one church, just 3 or 4 doors down from where we were living. And here's some of the damage that you see from that hurricane. Of course, there were other hard times, persecution, and so on. I always remember this picture. I happened to be away at the time and boarding school in Costa Rica. And I came home 2 weeks after the hurricane. And it's our house in the back that's still standing with the veranda. But you see a boat now sitting in our backyard from this hurricane. And there's a lot we could talk about that. Now, one of the big questions, and I don't know if I can truly answer this, maybe we can talk about it, is why do missionaries serve, particularly those who spend their lifetimes, overseas and go through some very hard times? I've grappled with that. I found that Grandpa was who I spent several summers with when I was a kid. He loved adventure. He loved to hike. I think he would have been an Indiana Jones if he hadn't been a missionary, but he was still a kind of an Indiana Jones, did a lot of things. Here we see a picture of him and another close friend of his, Pablo Lutz, who was the first Union colporteur secretary in Central America. He came from Germany, and they traversed on horseback and donkey across the Petén. And this is before people even knew that Tikal was known, some of the famous Maya ruins. And they did it just for the fun of it, besides visiting and establishing churches and so on. We see some other pictures here of Grandpa in his early years in South America, and that we can talk more about. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about my parents now. On the top right, there's my parents, my 2 younger sisters. They standing in front of the boat that they had in the Bay Islands of Honduras. My father was a pastor for a few years, 9 churches on about 30 different islands. And so everywhere he went, it was by boat. In the middle, that's me, the little boy there in the pineapple field. This is on a farm that became the first Adventist school in Honduras, and it was to become a college. And it was built on a beautiful farm that had originally been owned by the Standard Fruit Company. And this story, there's a lot we could talk about that story that's very interesting as well. Bottom middle, this is the whole Ford clan with the Moores. Some of you may know in the Northwest, Dr. Fred Moore, who recently passed. And he was the first doctor to establish a mission hospital in Nicaragua. My uncle Larson, the Larsons, Moores, and Fords are here. He was the first administrator. A little historic trivia. You never know. As on the right, these beautiful little 4 kids. That's my aunt Sylvia, my mother Vanessa, and Neil Wilson as a kid. The little boy there, that's Neil Wilson. They lived in a duplex. My parents and my grandparents on the maternal side with the Wilsons at Madison College in Tennessee. So there's interesting stories there. Now, what is the Ford legacy, particularly in El Salvador? That's what I'm going to focus on today. And there are many different schools and churches that were established. This was at the time in 2013 when I went down for the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the school that they built there in El Salvador. And there's another school as well. The big building in the bottom right, that was the Ford home for many, many years. It served as kind of a hotel as well for passing missionaries and pastors. It came to be known colloquially as the Ford Hotel because they entertained so many. There's a little cafe that's next to one of the Adventist school that commemorates my grandmother. That home of theirs in El Salvador is now the Book and Bible House bookstore in El Salvador. Here we're looking across the street in the top left. There's a picture of the central church in El Salvador, San Salvador, built by my grandparents with the school next door and so on. In the middle of the big tree, you see the buildings, and that's the one of the dormitories at the vocational boarding school built out in El Salvador that was built starting in 1979 to 73. We're building it, and then it opened in 1983. I went, as I said, in 2013 to the 30th anniversary of establishing that school, and we met some of the people there. Talk a little bit about some of the legacy. And I'd like to particularly point out the legacy of my grandmother and my mother, because I think they made very important contributions. Too often we tend to talk about what the men did, not what the women did. But here's my mom on the left with some of the students that she had over the years. She was choir director, she was pianist, she was piano teacher, she was a youth director at several different schools. Grandmother, as I said, established Pathfinders in Central America. And you see the pictures in the bottom right. These are Pathfinders in El Salvador during COVID. This is 2 years ago. I went on the news one day, was following the news in El Salvador, and they were handing out a medal to and this is the medal that was developed for Pathfinders in Central America or in El Salvador who had served during COVID to help people make it through, taking food around. Pathfinders in El Salvador is considered to be one of the top community organizations. And this was commemorating the 70 years of Pathfinders in El Salvador. So it's quite an event. So in March of this year, I went back to El Salvador, and this was at the airport when I landed, the welcome booth for all those coming in. So I'm talking now about what is the long-term legacy in my most recent visit down there. Here we're looking at a picture of my parents in their retirement. Of course, they retired and lived in, they worked in retirement for 10 years beyond retirement, and then came to live in Loma Linda. And then they helped to establish the Spanish church in the Loma Linda. So some of you may have even met them in Loma Linda. So they continued their work until both of their deaths, and they are buried there in Loma Linda. Here on the left is a picture of the main church at the school that they helped establish. Now, what's happening at this school now? This is really quite exciting, and this is what I want to focus on primarily in our discussion today. The original boarding school, it was built out in the country on a big farm. It had bees, it had sugarcane, it had orchards, and it was built in the traditional Adventist approach where most kids could come and work their way through school. It was quite successful. But over the years, it's been 40 years now, some of the buildings had gotten decrepit. And so there have been various volunteer groups that have come down to help reestablish. But the union president, who was one of my parents' students, and his story in itself is interesting because he was he was a gang leader, a young gang leader in El Salvador. As you know, El Salvador has had a terrible time with urban gangs. But he was sent by his parents out to the school, became well educated, and he's now the union president. And he's had a vision to turn this school into a college. And there are several groups that are helping to work on it and to build. Here are some of the groups I went in March. As I said, I was there for 10 days. We had groups that came from Indiana, from Michigan, California. There were 3 that came from Loma Linda. Some of you may recognize the long-haired blonde lady. She's a physician resident at Loma Linda. The lady next to her on her right is one of the professors in the dental school in Loma Linda. And then there are others that came from North Carolina, from Oregon, from Utah. There are there's many different groups that participate in this reconstruction and the building. And they're building a whole new complex that they're going to try to this will become the second Adventist college in Central America. And the idea is it's going to be called the Orley Ford University. This is some of the Andrews University group. The main leaders have been from the village church in Andrews University that are coordinating much of these trips and so on. This is one of their morning worships before they went out to take students to work either on the construction. Some of them that were medical people would go out to the surrounding villages on medical missions. So there's a lot going on. While I was there in March, they were able to dedicate the first classroom that they were almost finished. The windows aren't in yet, but this will be one of the first classrooms in this new complex. And they're now talking about it becoming the Orley Ford University. So as I said, people have come. They're hoping to open up in 2 years. They have at least 2 more years of construction and work to go on to make this dream come through. And it was really a pleasure for me to be there and to encourage them. Now, just to show you a few scenes around the campus, some of the people, maybe tell a few of some of the students I got to meet. This was some of the cafeteria crew. You see the young lady in the middle there. She is a student that was rescued from a family in which the father had 10 children. The father is now in jail because he got involved with drugs or something, and she was brought to the school. She's working her way through school, doing very well. Very bright kid. There's so many stories, many of them you could talk to them. The school, between the high school and the elementary school, it has about 1,300 students. About 800 are in the elementary school, and there's about 300 or 400 in the high school. There's only about 150 that actually live on campus. There's a fleet of 10 buses that goes all over the region. So it's quite an operation that students that come in during the daytime to school. This is the primary school and the gym where the primary elementary school, as I said, over 800 students. And this was really one of the highlights of my trip. Here we have about 500 of those students. I think this was the first 6 grades that were meeting for what we would call chapel, I guess, today. And they were singing in the gym, and it was just an absolute glorious experience. Here are some of the little kids that are in the first grades in that school. And of course, many of them have, as we say now, this is 40 years since the school gotten started. If you go back and think of all the kids that have grown up, some of them didn't make it well, others have done well. There are leaders throughout the country, and it's quite an amazing experience. It was really a pleasure for me to go around and meet some of these cute kids and talk to them, find out about their lives and why they are there at this school. Now, one of the things that they're rebuilding because of since COVID, the school has had to increase quite dramatically in size. So the cafeteria can no longer cook all the food that they need from the kitchen. And so they have to do part of their kitchen out under the tent. This is even in hot or rainy weather. And so here they're cooking outdoors. And so part of the construction is also building new facilities for the cafeteria. When the kids who work in the cafeteria need to take a break, there's no break room. So they have to go out under a tent and lay around in the grass while they're resting in between their shifts to feed not only, because all of the young students that come in on the buses, they serve over 1,500 people a day, a meal in food of students. But then while we were there, it was all of the volunteers. There was at least 150 of us from across the U.S. It was amazing to me how they could do on so little and out of date quarters. This young girl, quite an artist, has got some training at the school. They actually have an art program there at the school, and she was painting this mural, which I thought was really quite stunning. Here's the cafeteria with some of the students. People have to eat in shifts because the cafeteria is too small for everybody. But these are some of the kids, and you can see the mural there in the background. Now, one of the gentlemen that I got to know on this trip, which was really a pleasure, on the left, he lives in this house that we see on the right, which was my parents' house when they were there for 20 some years living in this house. He lives in the house, and he now manages all of the buses, 10 buses, and all of the transportation that goes over a whole region there to bring students to school early in the morning and then late in the afternoon. So this was a visit there. This is part of the campus. Now, adjacent to the college campus is another campus, but it's all part of the big complex that's run by the International Children's Fund, an Adventist orphanage. And some of you may know about this organization and the orphanages they run around the world. This is where I stayed. And then I stayed in this little house there on this orphanage campus, looking up at the volcano in the background, and then would walk over in the mornings to be part of the construction work in March when I was visiting there. Another one of the activities is really interesting. A few years ago, Maranatha went down to the school and they built this swimming pool. And you would think, well, what would Maranatha do that for? Well, they built the swimming pool, and it's become a major, the Red Cross, Salvadorian Red Cross, comes and teaches lessons of swimming to kids from all the surrounding communities, as well as a place to cool off and when it gets really hot for the students and so on. And it was nice to see that. Now, there are some plaques. These are just plaques commemorating the work done by my parents on the left, but then on the right, the funding, the initial funds that came for building the school back in 1979-80 is an interesting story, and I just want to mention it briefly. Dr. Daniel Chai, his brother, another Chai, who was the editor for many years of the Centinela, which is basically one of the Adventist publications in Latin America. But his brother worked for USAID, the State Department, and he was sent to El Salvador in 1978 to be head of the USAID. He had been a student of my parents 30 years before in Honduras. He grew up, went to the States, got educated, joined the State Department. He comes back, and here he is in El Salvador. My parents went there in 1979 to take care of Grandma Ford, who was now in her late 80s. And they got together one Sabbath and said, I wouldn't have made it if I hadn't had a place for my parents to send me when I was a young kid out into the country and get school and training. Let's build a school like we had there back in Honduras, here in El Salvador. So they spent a year scouring around, found a ranch that they could buy. It was over 1,000 acres of land, beautiful land in El Salvador, very expensive, hard to find. But he was able to get some of the funds to help build the first buildings. And so this is in memory of that work. Here's just a few other highlights of some of the kids and the people I met on this trip, which was really amazing. The young girl there in the middle, she's another one of the kids that's there at the boarding school. In this case, very bright kid. Her dad is in jail right now for drug running. And so our mother is raising I think it was 7 other siblings. This one girl came to the school and she was telling her story about growing up in a drug lord's home and becoming an agonist and moving away. It was very, very tough, very sad, but also happy to listen to the story. Now on this trip, now there you can see me along with the chief builder. The chief builder there on the right in the red shirt. He's an architect and builder from Indiana, and it's at Indiana Academy. I don't remember what town it was in, but they've been bringing students down, and he's been coordinating the building project. And it's me on the left. The young lady in the middle there is the same girl that's on the picture on the left when she graduated. Branson were had first built the school there in El Salvador. She now lives in Loma. There she goes back to Salvador a lot, and she has established one of the foremost clinics in El Salvador. And so she came up, and she's been helping to also fund this project. Here's a few slides from around the campus. This is the administrative building. And you notice that the buildings all have verandas because of the rainy season. And so you walk around on the verandas. This is where the main offices are located. And this was an interesting serendipity moment. When I first arrived, I walked in to meet the principal, the director of the school. Now it will become a college in 2 years, and here she is, and she said, "You know, your father married us, okay? Her deputy director, she's the director." And I thought that was a picture on her phone of my father married them when they were young kids, way many years ago. And you can see her in her office, the picture of my parents in the background on the wall. This is her husband, and he's one of the major administrators at the hospital, at the school. The young lady with the blonde hair from Loma Linda, she's one of the physicians, a resident that came down to volunteer. The shorter lady in the middle there, a little graying hair, met her. She's a Chinese Pan-American. Okay, her parents came from China to Panama during the era of Teddy Roosevelt when they were building the Panama Canal. She grew up, I guess it was her grandparents that did that, and her parents. And she eventually came to the U.S. She's become quite wealthy, and she's one of the major donors that is helping to fund this project. It was a wonderful experience to meet her down there. The school has now established a dental clinic and a little medical clinic. They serve the surrounding community as well, of course, the campus. And there was a doctor there, another older doctor. I'm not going to show it here, but he's also retired, and he's from Yucaipa. And he came down to this event. Now, we had one day in between all of the volunteer construction and so on that we took a fun day to go out and see some of the volcanoes. I went to these falls, went to some of these Mayan ruins. and this is one of the church groups we were with, was really a great experience to meet some of these kids and have fun with them. Now this thing is slowing down again. Let me let it catch up with itself. Okay, when we left, the day that all the volunteers left, these were various gifts, handmade crafts that were made by the students that were given to each of us that were volunteers at the project. And it was just a beautiful experience to go through that. Now, I'm going to just say a few other things because I mentioned, this is from my one of my careers, of course. Some of you know I work as a photographer from around the world, and I'm just going to say a few things. This is looking out our back window in the springtime, what it looks like. We look up, we live on a little ranch right near Zion National Park, and that's Zion in the background. You know, I am involved with some fine art and what National Geographic calls geotourism. Donna was asking her, what does that mean? And I think it's important to talk about because it relates to my story. The National Geographic has a Center for Sustainable Destinations. And they say that it's a type of tourism that sustains or enhances let me go back here, the geography, the character of place, its environment, its culture, its aesthetics, its heritage, and the well-being of its residents. So it's more than just about protecting the nature, but it's about understanding the culture of a place and its history. And I think that is so important as we look at this, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking about last week, you know, that we're not only trying to save nature and have healthy bodies and healthy communities, but we also want to remember the culture and the heritage of the people that we serve and work for. Just before we go to question and answer, I'll show you some of my favorite pictures. This was this is 5 years ago when we had a really big snow, the first big snow we had ever had here. First time I've ever had to clear snow out of my driveway, and that was quite an experience. And going up, catch up with us. Still hear me okay?
You are
can hear
breaking
you.
up from time to time, but we can hear you.
Okay. You can still, okay, yeah, it kind of froze up there for a bit.
It breaks up.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm gonna let it catch up here a little bit. Let me talk about this picture, if you can see it. A picture that I used in the initial slide as well. This is one of my last consulting trips and this was right near sunset. Now, is everyone hearing me okay? Yeah. Simona,
Yes, we're hearing you.
yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sure. I was just saying about that picture. I went as to work with the European Union Conservation Fund to help train park managers and park rangers in the two largest national parks in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They had been overrun during the civil wars by poachers and by guerrillas, not of the animal kind, but the human kind of guerrillas. And so with my training in GIS and geography and biodiversity. And so it was really quite an experience to show them. You can go through later and see some of these pictures from some of the various trips that I've taken around the world and places that I've explored either in teaching or as a Fulbright scholar and as a professor and so on. So I hope and maybe we'll let me just go to the end here, just make a few closing statements, go back and look at some of these if we wanted to a little bit later. The picture here where I'm saying thank you, that's me with one of the rangers that I was training in the Congo on my last trip to the Congo. Then here's I think it's important. We're at Father's Day weekend. I talked briefly about my mother and grandmother. I like to also mention my grandfather and father, talk about some of their heritage as Father's Day weekend, and then also remember my parents as well. This thing is okay, so I'm going to close the PowerPoint now so that we can maybe just talk, and it'll be a little bit easier, I think, to discuss some of the things you might have seen, and then get ready to.
Thank you so much, Bob. This was fascinating. I think it's always interesting to see, the predecessors, the times when they lived and the people they shared that time with. This is really beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing this. So it is now 11:25. If somebody has, maybe we can have maybe one or two questions and then take a little break. And then, come back and continue. So if anybody has anything that they would like to say right now, very briefly, and then we are going to take a break in about, 5 minutes or so. Okay. Nobody has anything to say right now.
Well, wait,
Donna?
wait.
Donna? I see Donna.
Oh, Donna's hand is up. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, Donna, and then.
I'm interested, thinking back about David's introduction of you that he said, the paragraph he sent out this week. And he pointed out that one of the issues he thought you might address is whether missionaries, of course, in particular, in our case, Adventist missionaries going to these countries, if we have a negative or a positive effect on the local cultures, and how we deal with that. I thought it was interesting to see your parents in Peruvian, I guess it was Peruvian dress.
Right.
Yeah. And wondered how they interacted with the local culture, and that was a good thing. It seems to me like if it would be a good thing for you. I don't know if the attitudes over the generations have changed or not.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the key questions we really ought to discuss. Remember that we're all products of our time and place, but even individually, we approach things in different ways. And having been born in the mission field and grown up with them, and been in a mission family, but then met many missionaries, I can say that it's hard to generalize and say that all missions or all missionaries did things for the right reasons or the wrong reasons or whatever. We are all, we have flaws, we have good points, and So, so I think we need to be open about what some of the impacts were. Now, I very briefly in one of the early slides pointed out the work that the Stahl Center has did about Anna and Fernando Stahl. And of course, they're at Loma Linda. And Charlie Teal, who was a very close friend of mine. In fact, I like to point out that his first trip to Central America, before he went on his great career of enhancing the work of the Stahls, is he came with me. When I took students from Loma Linda, we went to Guatemala and Honduras and Belize. He had never been on a trip like that before, and down in Mexico, he just loved it, and he just took off from there. But I like to say I got Charlie started on that second career of his. The impacts have been quite varied. I can remember discussions from my grandparents talking about how the Stahls looked at missions and how they looked at missions. They saw themselves not just as trying to baptize people, but change the culture and to deal with the kinds of oppression and the poor. This is why I had that reading from Pope Francis, where he talks about our duty to protect the poor and to enhance the oppressed. And of course, some of you may have read the story of the Stahls. My grandpa would tell me about Fernando Stahl would stand up to preach, and he'd have a 6-shooter sitting on the pulpit beside his Bible to basically, not threaten, but to say, look, I'm not afraid to use this, because he was under threat by a lot of the landowners that didn't want him to. He was truly a social activist that was trying to break down the peonage system that existed in Peru in those years. So, some of these early missionaries made a very important political as well as economic and social impact. It cost them a lot. It was dangerous. It was difficult. There were others, sadly, that also believed that this was part of the America First. It was part of America, expansionism, and their approach to missions in many cases was more, shall we say, in the likes of Teddy Roosevelt or something, than it was of the likes of Jimmy Carter. Their missions is a complex story. Now, what does it mean for today? And maybe we can get into this when we get into the later discussion. Today there are very few foreign missionaries from North America or Europe that are in Latin America. The few that you might meet would be there as technical people, primarily like auditors or medical people in our hospitals. The true missionary that's a pastor or so on is not as common any longer. And our church is very diverse. It's one of the largest and most diverse global churches of any church in the world. So it sets up many challenges. So how we define missions today, I'm sure different than how our early ancestors looked at it. So Donna, I don't know if that helps. It doesn't really answer anything, but I think maybe you've set us up for a very good point for a discussion.
Well, Dave set it up. I have one quick question before we stop. I see somebody named Brian Ford at our class, and I wondered if there's a relationship there.
That's my son, okay? He's a computer scientist, one of the leading computer scientists in Switzerland, okay?
Hi.
Okay, and he's watching us today from his little mountain retreat up in the mountains of Switzerland. He lives up in the mountains and commutes either electronically or by train down to Lausanne to the Federal Institute of Polytechnic Institute of Switzerland. Computer scientist, and so he's taken a different path, but he's done a great service as well. And so I really thank you, Brian, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And great to meet you all.
Well, Simona, I don't know, or McKinney, this might
yeah,
be time
a
for a
good
break.
time. Yeah, a good time to have a little break so you can take a little break yourself as well. So it is now 11:33. I'm proposing that we come back at 11:40. About 7 minutes should be enough, just for a quick break, and then we'll continue. See you soon.
Okay,
So we are back from our break, and as usual, we sometimes have very interesting insights and conversations during the break that we don't record, but they somehow inform our conversation going forward. And I would like to maybe go back a little bit to what Donna started, and based on Dave Larson's comment. And to tie it maybe a little bit to what McKinley presented in the break, and ask maybe a little bit different question. What exactly is mission? I mean, sometimes I think we think of mission in a very narrow sense of the word, but don't you think that there is a much wider impact that anybody can have, not just people who are considered missionaries, but every single person who is bringing a new idea into the world is in a way a missionary, and how this enhanced idea of mission work can help us, to tie it back to your presentation last week, how that enhanced idea of mission can help us preserve the environment and have greater impact on the world in which we live. I would like to hear you, yes, Bob, first, but definitely want to invite others as well.
Sure, yeah. Both my parents and grandparents felt that missions was about service and enhancing what we mentioned last week, reconciliation, redemption, restoration, whether it be of health or whether it be of communities or families. And I have focused more on the broader environmental issues of reconciliation and redemption. So I think it's all part. We all have a place to play. We can be missionaries in our own lives, but I'd definitely like to hear what some of the others say and maybe how they approach the word mission.
And I think this is a good time to give this over to Monty, who is going to moderate the rest of the discussion. Monty, please take it away.
All right. I didn't know if you were going to have me share today. All right. Welcome, everybody. I want us to try something a little bit different this time in terms of my sharing. Oftentimes people want a comment and a question. So I'm going to say, let's have it be one comment and one question per time in the queue. Or if you don't have a comment, we'll give you two questions. So you kind of get two pieces. And we'll see how that goes. Please limit yourself to those so I don't have to. And we'll try to get first comments, questions as a priority in the queue, as well as some gender balance in our comments. So I am open to hands for questions. I don't have anyone on my list just yet. Donna, you can jump on in.
Oh, thank you. One thing I noticed in reading through your CV, Bob, and it really impressed me. Yes, you've done all this work everywhere for everybody, and literally all over the globe. But you also are very involved, at least it seems as though, with your local community right there in Rockville, Utah, teaching at the local university and serving on the local government entities, boards, land planning, I believe the planning commission. And so I was interested in how you maintain such a broad interest and involvement? And do you see your work at Rockville as part of mission as well?
Well, yes, maybe I mentioned a few things. Much of what I've done has because of my training in geography and land use planning and management, agriculture. Our little ranch, we have a little 9-acre ranch. It has been turned into a conservation easement, jointly working with the state of Utah's Fire and Forestry Department, with the USDA, Department of Natural Resources, and the Nature Conservancy. And so one of the things that I have tried to do is to model good conservation practice, water conservation, land management. Of course, I was 6 years, I was on the Planning Commission. For one of those years, I was the chair of the Planning Commission. And because of my background, I was helping to change policy, which was kind of difficult for a while, dealing with where you could build and not build relative to the cliffs that are all around us, that every now and then you have rock falls. Maybe, I'm not sure if I've told this story before, but I was able to get land use policy changed that you couldn't build a house any longer within 100 feet of the runout zone from rock falls that come off of these cliffs. That's why it's called Rockville. Okay. And so I can remember the mayor at the time was very upset at me because, he said, well, these people here, they want to build up where they want and so on. And so it was the year after that, we passed the rule anyway, was able to get it through. And we had a heavy winter, like one that we've had this year. And of course, if any of you know anything about geology, you know that freeze thaw, all the water percolates, gets down into the rock, it gets cold and freezes, expands, and then the rocks come down. So we had one of these big rock falls, and it came down, huge boulders, the sides, it was about 10 huge boulders and rocks came down and completely smashed the house right at supper time. It was a couple that were both killed instantly. That worked in the park. By the way, I never had anyone complain afterwards that we need to not have this rule. Now, was that mission service? Back to it. I don't know. It's part of the issue. Now, I've been focused a lot on the water issues, so water conservation in the county. I ran twice for county commission. I didn't expect, or I didn't have much of a chance of winning, but I felt it was my duty to help to educate the public about water conservation, about land management, growth management. The gentleman that I ran against is a good friend, and we had good amicable discussions, but it was we only have a 3-council county commission, where we were the fastest growing county in the country, are now the 2nd fastest growing county in the country. And so there are a lot of issues to be dealt with. So I don't know, does that come from a missionary background? I think it does. I think that, I never wanted to be a minister per se, even though I studied religion back in college. But I felt that, and it was interesting, the one that kind of guided my career is when I took social anthropology at Loma Linda. Maybe some remember Dr. Elick, the Betty, and that established the anthropology at Loma Linda University. What it means to be a missionary is about not only saving environment, but saving cultures. And small town, I feel that where I can help to protect it. Our little town has now gotten awards from the state for being the best small little town in Utah. And for some of the things that we've protected, like historic bridges, waterways, and so on. And it's kind of a little island of, I say a little island of sanity in the middle of the rapid growth that's happening here in southern Utah. So that's been my vision, my view. I hope that see what you think about it.
Well, thank you. That's kind of the answer. So you better not tell too many more people about the best little town in Utah, or it won't be the best little town there much longer.
Yeah.
I would just
Please stay away. Go to the next town.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you very much. I've got a question, and then I've got Lisa Butler, a question from her, and then I also have Simona and Dana on my list as well. So, Bob, my question is, I'd just like you to talk a little bit about the idea of missionary-driven projects versus local perspective-driven projects, and what your thoughts are on that. In other words, outsiders coming in and telling people what they need versus outsiders coming in to help locals who have needs that they've come up with. Can you just share your perspective on that?
Sure. For that, I'd like to go back to someone that really guided me in the kind of missions is Dr. Oosterwald. He was for many years at Andrews University. We studied with him before we went to Africa, to Rwanda, and then I also worked with him. I actually taught Missions Institute for one of the years that they had it, when they had it at Loma Linda, and I went with him to do Institute in Australia. That was my first time to Australia. But his approach has always stuck with me. He said, missions is not about it's not a superior person coming to an inferior person telling them how they should live their lives. It's about coming together in a mutual understanding of our humanity and our needs, and then sharing ourselves with them and they sharing with us. And he felt, and I agree with him, that he said, if you're really open to that truly egalitarian, equal exchange, missionaries can learn as much as they give, if not more. And if you're open to that sharing and working together in a common human way, said that's missions. Now, I've seen the kind of missionaries that felt that, okay, we're going to come and train the heathen to be less heathen, to put it bluntly, and that doesn't work. It usually falls apart. And I'll never forget his defining of missions as a collaborative, interactive process by human beings who love each other. That's important.
All right, thank you. I'm going to transition to Lisa's question, and I'm going to read it for her. I've been assigned. So I'm just going to read what she wrote here. Overall effect of missionary endeavors. This is what David sent out. Positive, negative, or both. And positive, you today have illustrated a number of positive effects of mission work and establishment of schools and a number of other things. Can you unpack what the negatives are that need to inform mission activities? And maybe an example or two.
Yes, I'd say some of the negatives are when we see ourselves as representative of a particular political or economic or other ideology, and then we're trying to push that, assuming that what we're bringing is better than the others. And I've seen many examples of it. And of course, it's just human nature that you get in any institutional situation where there are people that have to work together. We've all had experiences with good bosses and bad bosses, good working environments, bad working environments. And usually, those, I'm not a human rights or a psychologist or something, but the ability to interact with people without, and then to be open to understanding your biases. I think that's the most difficult thing. And we see, of course, a lot of that today, where people assume of their hatreds or their biases or their cultural background, that someone else needs to be changed. And if they don't understand, then we need to force them. And I think that's the biggest danger. That's the biggest downside of missions. If you don't have the right person who understands what being a missionary is. And of course, the General Conference through its mission has tried for years to help people. I can hear Dr. Oosterwal telling me once, though, he said the problem is once they've been selected and they come to you to be trained, quotes, as a missionary before they go out at Missions Institute, it's already too late. Because what if you've chosen someone, and usually, and I think the General Conference is doing a better job now of screening who goes on missions. But if you don't choose the right person, or if you're going for the wrong reasons, you're trying to escape, or you're trying to whatever the reason is that's not a healthy reason. But if you're selected and then you go to Missions Institute, and then you go to the mission field and then you fail, it's difficult. And it's not, and Monty, I'd like to hear from you. You're a trained psychologist, social worker, and you understand the problems of finding how will people react under stress? How will they react in a workplace where multilingual? You have, how do you train people to truly be able to do the right thing in the right time? Maybe you.
Well, it is quite a challenge. I just had a class of graduating MSW students, and I have a project. And one of the areas that we do there is we work on that, looking at conflicting values. And it's a challenge even for graduate students, but 2 steps in a process that I do with that are having them first reflect on the various values to be able to articulate their own and their own values, as well as the values of other constituencies, and then identify areas of agreement, areas of disagreement, and then looking for ways to bridge for areas of disagreement. And I have 2 phrases I use. I call it bridging or finding common ground, and value definitions of what those 2 mean. And working on that, those are actually the first 2 steps of resolving a conflict. Then there's a whole bunch of other things for steps for decision making, but we start with identifying values and then looking for differences and areas of conflict. So it is a trainable skill. A lot of people don't want to go there or have a hard time going there, but I think there's value in that.
Yeah, and I think that the Missions Institute, they're trying to do a better job of training, where you can. And I think the ideas you're suggesting, conflict management, human relations, those are the core of the problems, where there are any problems. So there's plenty of room for good social scientists to help in this missions work.
I actually have a follow-up to your specific comment. And because you talked about not imposing, coming in as the superior and imposing cultural or economic superiority. It seems to me that at the base of much of missions is doing that theologically.
Right.
And we do it because we say, well, because we've got the right religion, or a lot of people believe that. And so what's your perspective on that? And before your answer, I want to say that I've got Simona, then David, and then Dana following up. So what's your perspective on that? Because it seems like it's so much at the core, proselytizing, I guess is the name we would say of that. But to me, it's a flavor of what you were talking about can go so wrong with missions.
Yeah, and that's always been a difficult thing for me personally. It was one of the reasons that I decided I didn't want to be a pastor, even though my parents assumed I would become a pastor. Of course, they became teachers after they were pastors and spent the rest of their lives in education. And I guess that influenced me because I always felt that I would rather be helping people grow and learn and explore and do things rather than trying to bring them to some theological perspective. And so, or particularly to force it on them. Now, having served and worked around the world, and as I said, some of you may remember, I was the first academic dean at the Adventist University of Central Africa. That university, I was the vice president, and the president was Dr. Wallace. Some of you may know from PUC days. We started out with 25 students. The university now has 7,500 students. It's the largest private university in Rwanda. It's done amazing work. And I'm really proud of that legacy and what has happened. But I can remember many times cultural conflicts. We were in Rwanda before the genocide. The genocide came after we had already come home. We went back to serve at the National University in Rwanda after the genocide to help with the healing and restoration from that terrible experience. And it really, there were many experiences that have made me want to deal with these, to be a conciliator as much as possible. I've made many mistakes. I think anyone that's been involved in administration or trying to serve others can do it in the wrong ways. And so I don't have any simple answers, Monty, but I don't know if that helps any.
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, up next is Simona, then David, then Dana. Simona.
Dana made actually a comment saying that she wanted to say that service is the best type of ministry. And she continued and said, so Bob, you might not be a minister of a church, but your ministry is impacting the whole world. And I think that is a very important distinction. As you were talking, I was thinking about my father, and he taught me a very valuable lesson. And he said, when you go into a new system, you first learn how the system works before you try to change it. Because you cannot come with, from above saying, oh, I know better than you do. Even if you do know better, you need to find out, how is this system working? How is this community working? What are the issues that they're dealing with before you can address them and kind of resolve them. So that would be my comment. My question is maybe it goes a little bit different direction, and maybe we can continue with this discussion that we are having now, and I can come back with this question later.
No, absolutely. You're right on there, Simona. And I guess that's one of the things that anthropology study kind of helped me to understand, that we need to know the culture and the people and the place before we really can be of service. And that means learning to recognize our biases, our own culture, and to keep our ears open. So when there are conflicts, there will be conflicts. And that's being human, I guess.
Oh, if I can just say, I mean, I often say that the most difficult thing about working with people is working with people.
Absolutely.
And so, we need to recognize that in a way, every time you talk to a person, it's like walking into a minefield without a map, because you don't know what these people, you don't know their history, don't know their trigger points, you don't know their pains, and you don't know their biases, and sometimes you don't even know your own. And so I think it's a growth to work in a community, no matter what that community may be, but particularly when there is a community of a different that is of different cultural or religious background. It is, I think, a big part of successful ministry is in humility, in recognizing all the things that we don't know.
Yeah, and going back a little bit to what Monty was asking, I missed this part. One of the things that is part of what you're saying, Simone, I can remember in Belize that our closest friends was the Nazarene pastor that lived about 2 doors down from us. And we got to be very close friends as kids with this Nazarene family. And, about 3 buildings up was the Anglican church. And it was a very diverse community. I don't know how many of you have been to Belize, the former British Honduras, from slaves to former slaves to Mayan Indian culture to British to Dutch, very, very diverse. And I think I learned more about being open to diversity in that place than any place I've ever been. I don't think I've ever lived in a place that was so complex, except for maybe the 9 months that I was consulting in Abu Dhabi in the Muslim culture. And it's tough, learning to work across cultures, and particularly if you start throwing in the religious aspect. And then back to what Monty was asking, it's tough enough sometimes for us to get along with diversity theologically within our church. But if you're open to other churches and other people, other beliefs, you realize there are good people in all religions. I don't know, maybe I don't mind admitting this. I did my field research in West Africa in nomadic herders, Muslim people on the border between Mali and Burkina Faso. My closest friend, and the one I learned more about what it means to be a Christian, was the local Muslim imam. I stayed in his yard. I worked in 3 different communities, and I would travel around in my truck, and he let me park my van and my little tent in his yard. We got to be good friends. I learned a lot of things about what it meant to be a good Muslim that helped me to be a good Adventist. I hope. Okay, I haven't been perfect. No one has. But I think learning to interact with other religions, other people is very important also about missions. I don't know if that helps or not.
Okay, thank you very much. David.
Yes, I was intrigued by your earlier references to Charles Teal Jr. and Anna and Fernanda Stahl. My wife, Janine, and I had the privilege of going with Charles Teal in 1994 on one of his annual trips to Peru. And I don't remember too much about the history of Anna and Fernanda Stahl, although I'm sure he went into some detail about it. But, we talk about the extent to which missionaries may foist a Western style culture upon those with whom they're laboring. But then it's quite another thing, if you're Anna and Fernanda Stahl, to seemingly foment some social and economic revolution within that culture. That is to say, did they or did they not sort of participate in a kind of liberation theology some half century before the Catholic Church co-opted that term? What
No.
say you about that?
Well, absolutely, they did. They did. There's no doubt about it. And so did my grandparents. I think to me, if you go back and read the book about my grandparents, These Fords Still Run, Barbara Westphal, who wrote the book, this is back in the 60s. She talked a lot about the blowback from particularly the priests and the local Catholic hierarchy and the landowners against what they were doing, and expressed it more as a kind of a religious animosity. But a lot of it really was political, because my parents started a clinic, they started schools, they were training kids to read. These were things that you didn't do if you were a landowner. You wanted kids to grow up illiterate so they can work on your farm. My grandfather even, he apologized for being a social activist as well as, as a Christian. Now, I think our church has changed a little bit in this regard. I don't know if it's for the better or worse, but it's my opinion now. I think the church, because it's a global church in almost every country of the world, it has so focused on hierarchy, preserving, and sometimes go along just to make sure that we continue to work. And I can remember this debates that we had in Rwanda when we were debating when we built the college, whether we should do it in conjunction with the government so we could get full recognition from the government. And then, the degrees would be, or whether it should become more of a missions college in which you wouldn't have, you could kind of do what you want more independently. Now, we decided to work with the government. Now, we had a lot of hard debates, and I was actually the one, since I was the academic dean or vice rector, I had to sit down with the Ministry of Education to negotiate how we were going to make this college, how is it going to work, how we're going to work with the government regulations and our own. And it was tough. So I don't know. I think we need to be open to those kinds of things. I think we can still do it in a spirit of compromise and understanding, but sometimes I think we have to be willing to stand up and make changes and say we're not going to go along with this or that or the other. I don't know if that helps you, David, and to think it through.
Yeah. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. It does add complexity to the whole idea of being a missionary. It's, as I said, it's one thing not to unnecessarily bring upon them requirements from your own culture.
Right.
But it's quite another thing to decide whether you're going to help them within their culture in ways that supersede, though they may be parallel with the theological purpose for your being there. You may feel you need to help them in their economic and social lives as well. And perhaps that, if it doesn't get you into too much trouble with the government, is another avenue besides health as a kind of an entering wedge, maybe even. If you're helping these people in any way, they may be more inclined to listen to what you have to say about the gospel.
Oh, absolutely. To go back to the Rwanda experience, excuse me, my sore throat, but one of the things that as academic dean, initially the college was going to be primarily a theology program with education, kind of very traditional Adventist, and with pre-nursing kind of thing. And I said, okay, we need to add agriculture, history, teaching of the French language, public health. There was several other programs that we started. And it was quite a debate about whether we should do this at all. Where the biggest debates occurred, and if any of you know anything about the history of Rwanda, okay, when we started the college back in the early 80s, this was after they had had the first major genocide in Rwanda back in the 40s, 30s and 40s. Their culture was already fractured between the minority Tutsi and the majority Hutu peoples. So there was this underlying already fractured society that was along these ethnic lines. And of course, when we were negotiated with the government, the admissions policies, they were saying, okay, you need to make sure there's a quota that's only, you know, so much for the Tutsi and so much for the Hutus and this. And we put our foot, at least I and our staff, we said, no, we're not going to do quotas, because the government had quotas to get into the university that were based on ethnic and linguistic lines. So that was the toughest issue. And then, you know, even choosing faculty, we had faculty from 18 different countries, okay, that were on our faculty, and getting, you know, they wanted us to restrict this, no French, because they didn't like the French, because the French had been involved with, you know, and the Belgians, and they didn't want this. And a lot of our the discussions and organization were about a lot of these issues that go back to the colonial history of the country and how do you deal with that. Now,
so did you then try to help the Tutsis as the underclass more than you worked with the Hutus?
yeah, we did. Now in Rwanda, you know, the three basic ethnic groups, there's the Tutsi, they're about 10% of the population. Then you had about 85% that are the Hutu, and then you have a small group that are the descendants of the Bantu peoples, you know, and the Bantu were traditionally in Rwanda the most oppressed of people, hardly ever got education. So we went out of our way to find spots in schools for some of these oppressed groups. Now, they had just had a civil war between Rwanda and Burundi, the next door country. And so we also worked with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to become a designated institution for refugees to come get their education. So one of the most proud things I had was we had quite a few, and some of our best graduates were those that had been refugees from either the Congo or from Burundi. And I learned a lot of lessons and made mistakes, but it, to me, you know, that kind of trying to find solutions to helping people to grow up and work together as civil people. Of course, later the genocide came along, some things that went bad, but it's gotten better. Today, the university, by the way, has the largest and best computer science program in the country. Anyone that wants to learn computer science, they now go to the Adventist University. Loma University has now started a medical school with them. It's going to be the only medical school in the country. And it's done jointly with the government to serve the whole people. And I think that's possible because I think over the last 30 years that the school has been started, we were willing to work with the country through both the difficult times and the hard times, including the genocide, and come back and say, how can we continue to serve the country as well as the church? And so I think it's a different kind of mission, but I think it's an important one.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Let's see. Our host has his hand up.
Thanks, Monty, but I thought Dana was next.
Yeah.
Well, I think Dana put her hand down. Dana?
I wrote my comment. I wrote my comment.
Oh, she wrote her comment, she said. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Monty, for recognizing me. Bob, in all of your qualifications, somehow I missed the land use planning part.
Yeah.
And the reason that jumped out at me today is because when we did our joint agency report to the legislature on reducing California's petroleum dependence, there were 5 policy recommendations: efficiency, conservation, fuel substitution, land use planning, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. Now, out of those 5, most people have focused only on 2. Land use planning and conservation have all gone by the wayside. Given the energy implications of land use planning, how do you see land use planning sort of tying into the strategies and solutions for reducing climate emissions, just from your perspective? Because even at this workshop this week, that was not addressed. And somebody came up to me from the Electric Power Research Institute and wanted to know, well, what did California say about land use planning?
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's really central. If you look at St. George, which I've become more knowledgeable of because of being here now 25 plus years, the whole issue of whether you encourage, you know, what kind of conservation you encourage, whether you're encouraging landscaping that's low water use, so-called xerophytic, whether you encourage spreading out in the traditional, you know, large lots over big areas with big lawns, you know, and what you do to encourage more condensed housing and built around planning for transportation and on all of that is so central to quality of life and to cost of living, but also to use of water. So I don't know. I think land use planning and is really at the core of making things work, because if you don't create the right kind of planning for the future and build and stick to those plans, you can back yourself into corners that are very hard to get out in terms of either energy conservation or wildlife management or conflict or you name it. So and I don't know, I kind of evolved in my career into land use issues, but I think it really is absolutely central to so many questions.
Thank you. Monty, may I ask my second question quickly, please?
You're in the queue, so you get 2 questions. Isn't it exciting?
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that. Okay, Bob, the other question is, in your slides, I took note of one of them, and I don't even remember this, but it says on that slide, Educación, I don't know Spanish, Adventista Union Salvadorian. You asked the question, why do missionaries serve? I think the education function is just so critical. And I'm just wondering, given your vast background and your role as academic dean in that first Central African Adventist University, are we paying enough attention to education? And I mean, education written, you know, broadly written, not just focused on theology and spiritual stuff.
Well, I think some places we're doing a better job than others, but it is absolutely essential. In Rwanda, now I don't know how many of you I'm going to go back to Rwanda for a lot of understanding of this. Rwanda has the highest number of Adventists per capita of any country in Africa. Okay, it's also a very, very densely settled country, and education has really made the difference in terms of not just a traditional Bible school model, you know, training ministers, teachers, and nurses kind of thing, but because we made a decision that we're going to be part of the country's growth and change. And so we developed all kinds of majors and approaches to education that have absolutely had a phenomenal effect in the country. Last time Karen and I were in Rwanda, we taught at the National University, and not at the Adventist University, but the National University. And I was there as a director of one of their research centers. And I constantly would run into Adventists who had been at our school, are now in government or in the private sector, and it's had a huge impact. And so I hope that as a church, we continue to focus on education. But like you, I think, McKinley, I would like to see us, when we look at our education systems, even here in the US, think about tracks that we traditionally haven't trained for. I mean, I never learned land use planning at going to an Adventist college. I had to go to the University of California as a geographer. I'm sure there are areas in engineering. We do have one good engineering school, I understand. But there are, I think, many different careers that our Adventist schools don't train our students for, that we really could be doing, that would give kids a broader way of serving in the world. You know, I wish I had had an option of learning some political science back in college. Back in college, they wouldn't have let me take it, even if they taught it. But if I'd had some more training, I later got some political science training as part of my degree, my PhD. But it helped me a lot to understand how to deal with problems of diplomacy and international relations and things like that. So, you know, I wish there was a school here in the US that our kids could go to and learn international relations. They could go and work for the State Department or the UN or whatever. So I think there's still a lot of need for growth in terms of broadening what we do in education, in Adventist education.
Thank you.
Okay, I need to do a clarification for my lineup, because if it's a question from Jeff, Jeff is going to jump the line for gender balance, but it's Donna. Okay, well, let's go to Simona, and then we'll go to Donna, and that's probably going to be it for the day. Simona, you're up.
Monty, before Simona speaks, there's somebody in the queue from an iPhone that also wants to make a comment. So just wanting to alert you to that.
I'm going to give that person the chance to speak because I already did, and then we can go to Dawn and I can be the last one.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you, everyone.
I think that's me, the person that I just made. I wanted to make a comment. My name is Ruth, and I'm originally from Peru, and I grew up in the time in the 60s, and I was in Lake Titicaca. My parents were missionaries. And I do remember hearing how much Pastor Stahl and his wife brought the change in the region of Puno, Cusco. And it was pride. I felt pride in seeing that happened, because in my years of growing up, I saw how the indigenous people still were not having the opportunities that other people in Peru had. Bringing to today, I was in touch with a student from the university in Peru, but who is finishing her course in theology. And her heart was troubled to see that what is happening in Peru politically right now has been very violent, especially for the young people that are protesting against the injustices that have been going on for years, and lately more visible in the political situation in Peru. And she told me, she asked her professors at the university, what can we do with these injustices, this mistreatment that has happened for us as a church? What can we do? And the majority has been, the answers have been, we need to pray about it, but we are not to get involved politically. I mean, Adventist people have died. They have been killed because of some of the people have protested, the young people. And so she tells me, I cannot just pray. We must do more. And the other thing is when the soccer games come on, the university is openly favoring, cheering the soccer games. But she says when there is unrest, and in her view, politically, there should be some kind of a stand, some statement to the social injustice that is happening. You just don't get involved. The church does not want us to be involved. What it brings to me to say is how Pastor Fernando Stahl and Ana Stahl did make changes politically in the educational system. And as I just heard you, Robert, saying, yes, our educational system needs to broaden the education in other areas that we've done well in medical school, in the health, but in the social justice, in the political, I think is something, and I am so pleased to see women in Peru that are noticing this, and they're saying, we need to speak up, but of course you're a woman, you cannot speak up. You have to do it quietly. So anyway, just a comment, and I really enjoyed your talk and looking at the pictures. Thank you for being there, and thank you for giving me the time to just say what I had in my heart at this moment.
Well, thank you so much for that, because that is the challenge. I maybe I didn't say it as strongly as administrative discussions, was how we should get involved with the government and political. And it wasn't just about curriculum, but it was about speaking up. And there's always pressure, and I think there's more of it, to not get involved because of fears that the backlash it will have on our institutions, that they would either close our hospitals or schools, or that they will, impose certain kind of regulations. And whether we do it tacitly or overtly, we can create in our students people that are really not involved as the way they should. But I think there are ways of helping our young people to be committed and engaged without necessarily becoming radicalized, destructive side of things. So finding the middle ground in politics is always the most difficult thing. How do you train students to learn to find the ways you can be involved and help change without being destructive? On that, and that a lot of that depends on the local circumstances. But thank you so much. I know you mentioned Puna or Puno. That's where my father was born. So that's it brings back good memories. Thank you.
Okay, I think Donna, did you want to comment? I'm not sure if Simona has. Where Donna is okay. Simona's hand is down. Simona, I think we're ready for you to bring us to a close or to ask your final question.
My as I was listening to this, I was thinking about something. And what I was thinking about is where we are coming from and where we belong. And I think it's a big part of your presentation today, spoke in some way to about your roots and about, you know, where you belong. And I found this really interesting presentation. I'm not going to have the whole of it, just the first about 2 minutes of it, before we close this session. But I thought it was a very thoughtful way of looking at belonging and our roots. So I would like to share it with you.
I'm here to talk with you about nurturing the roots of belonging. So what does it mean to belong? Feeling like you belong somewhere, like you belong with a community, you belong with an organization, you belong with your family or your friends. You belong in a place, someplace that feels like home, where you feel trusted and you trust them, where you feel heard and you hear them in return, where you feel seen and respected for who you are, and you see and respect everybody else for who they are as well. It's safe to make mistakes and to have all of your emotions, including being upset or irritated or really angry, because those roots of belonging are not going to be shaken. If anything, they'll be strengthened because you've worked it out. But it also takes practice, this sense of belonging, because we create it every day. And we don't just belong to groups of people. These communities, these families, these organizations all happen in places. They all happen on soil and with trees nearby, with flowers that offer us their scent, with bees that pollinate everything else, with water that nourishes everything. We're in relationship with all of those elements, no matter where we are, and we belong to the places. The indigenous peoples around the world will tell anyone that they belong to the land, not the other way around. That their stories, that who they are belongs to the land. And it's no different for any other human peoples. The places and the peoples are where the belonging happens. So how
I thought this was such a wonderful way of looking at, you know, who we are and what belonging truly means. And for our benediction, I've chosen a poem for belonging by John O'Donohue. May you listen to your longing to be free. May the frames of your belonging be generous enough for your dreams. May you arise each day with the voice of blessing whispering in your heart. May you find a harmony between your soul and your life. May the sanctuary of your soul never become haunted. May you know the eternal longing that lives in the heart of time. May there be kindness in your gaze when you look within. May you never place walls between the light and yourself. May you allow the wild beauty of the invisible world to gather you, mind you, and embrace you in belonging. Go in peace, and we'll see you next Sabbath. Thank you.